to the Dublin Festival of History 2024. We are delighted to welcome Liam Maloney for this talk, Shackleton's 1909 Dublin Lecture and the Lady Dudley Nurses. Before we start, I'd like to inform all our audience members that this session is being recorded and will be made available to view on YouTube after the festival. You can also switch on closed caption option during this Zoom. We will have a Q&A at the end, so questions in the Q&A box only. In this hour-long talk, we will hear about Ernest Shackleton after his Antarctic expedition, and this talk will outline his expedition, his post-Nimrod fame, the celebrations held in his honour in Dublin, and the nursing scheme that he financially assisted. Liam Maloney has been working with polar material for 10 years, starting in the Shackleton Endurance Exhibition in Dún Laoghaire. He was historian with the Norwegian Cruise Line's 2023 cruise season to Antarctica. He manages the Shackleton's Endurance Facebook page and network and has written for the James Caird Society Journal. I'll pass you over to Liam and enjoy the talk.
Great, thank you very much. Thanks to everyone for signing up and then signing in this evening to hear this talk from the festival. I hope you've enjoyed some of the talks thus far. I suppose in particularly relevant to me today is Beverly's talk the other day in Pearse Street, and I see your name on the list there. Hi, Beverly. Thanks for coming. She got through a lot and did so very well. So I hope you enjoy this paper as well. So I suppose I'll just get going. I'll share my presentation. Good. Maybe just a thumbs up or something to let me know that's okay. Well, good. Okay. Thanks for that. Excellent. So thanks again to the festival for having me, and particularly for Donald Fallon, who was my contact and kind of got this happening for me. So just a small thanks there. So I'll get going. Sir Ernest Shackleton is a significant figure in the history of Antarctic exploration of the early 20th century. He was part of 4 expeditions to a vast and mostly unknown part of the world. Following the successes of his Nimrod Antarctic expedition, 1907-1909, Shackleton's fame soared. He was a celebrity, a hero, and a very desirable person to meet. He used his journey home from Antarctica to visit the Commonwealth countries, shake the hands of his supporters and patrons, receive praise, and to give lectures about his adventures on the ice. So this presentation this evening will tell of Shackleton's big day in Dublin in December 1909, and of the funds for nurses in Ireland established by Lady Dudley, which Shackleton supported. First, I'll give a quick biography of Shackleton, and then a very brief outline of the Nimrod expedition's successes, as well as its reception on the homeward journey and in London. So born in County Kildare, Shackleton's family moved to England, where he attended schools until his entry into the Merchant Navy as a teenager. He was a capable sailor and passed exams to become a master mariner. He was third officer. Shall I move on? He was third officer on SS Tintagel Castle that brought troops to South Africa during the Second Boer War. His polar break was with the British Antarctic expedition aboard SY Discovery under Robert Falcon Scott, 1901-1904. He was popular amongst the men. He edited the South Polar Times, the monthly magazine, and was part of the Polar Party with Scott and Wilson. Shackleton's ill health was deemed serious enough for Scott to send him home early in 1903. Shackleton tried to find other outlets for his energies. He married Emily Dorman. He was secretary of the Royal Scottish Geographical Society, and he ran unsuccessfully for Parliament in Dundee. His restlessness and need for adventure led him back to the great icy south. His Nimrod expedition, 1907-1909, was perhaps his greatest success. It brought him great esteem, but his restlessness had him looking south again. He's best known for his Imperial Transantarctic expedition, 1914-1917, and the great leadership and rescue of the Endurance men in the Weddell Sea. Shackleton served in the British Army, particularly in northern Russia following his return. His last expedition south was aboard ORYS Quest in 1921-1922. It was in his ship's cabin that he died on the 5th of January 1922, anchored off South Georgia Island. Shackleton has received much media attention over the last few years. 2016 was the centenary of the rescue of the 22 Endurance men from Elephant Island, and a statue by Mark Richards was unveiled in Athy, County Kildare. The centenary of his death in 2022, and the greatest news story was the wreck of Endurance being found by the Endurance 22 project. 2024 is his 150th birthday year, and a new memorial was unveiled in Westminster Abbey, here on the left. The wreck of Quest was found by the Royal Canadian Geographical Society, here on the middle. And most recently, his polar medal was gifted to Canterbury Museum in New Zealand, seen there on the right. The immediate context for the subject of this presentation is Shackleton's Nimrod expedition. It was under his command and aimed at geographical discovery, oceanographical, geological, and meteorological research. It had many successes, but here are the three best known. The ascent of Mount Erebus, the location of the South Magnetic Pole, and a new furthest south trek towards the South Geographical Pole. Discovered by James Clark Ross in 1841, a Nimrod party comprising Edward David, Douglas Mawson, Alistair Mackey, Jameson Adams, Eric Marshall, and Sir Philip Brocklehurst successfully reached the summit of Mount Erebus of Ross Island on the 10th of March 1908. Brocklehurst, however, did not reach the summit as he was suffering from severe frostbitten toes, which were surgically removed not too long after returning to camp. A team of three, Douglas Mawson, Alistair Mackey, and Edward David, reached the magnetic South Pole, or as close to it as Douglas Mawson could calculate, on 16th of January 1909. Mawson's calculations marked the position to be 72 degrees 25 south, 155 degrees 15 east. The Union flag was raised, and David ceremoniously took possession of the area of the British Empire. The Polar Party, comprising Eric Stuart Marshall, Jameson Boyd Adams, Frank Wild, and Shackleton, made their final push south on the morning of the 9th of January 1909. At 9 a.m., the latitude of 88 degrees 23 south was their location, a new record. The men placed the Union flag and formally annexed the polar plateau for the British Empire. They had a hurried lunch, lingered for only a few moments, and began their retreat. There were 97 geographical miles from the South Pole. Having left the Antarctic continent, the first inhabited place to which Nimrod called was Half Moon Bay on Stewart Island, just south of New Zealand. Shackleton wanted to dispatch telegrams to London concerning the expedition before he faced the press anywhere else. This done, on the 23rd of March 1909, Shackleton and Nimrod proceeded to Lyttelton, New Zealand, and arrived on the 25th of March. His arrival and reception in New Zealand set a pattern of how Shackleton was received in most, if not all, ports of call. The arrival of the ship and crew was greeted with guns booming and flags waving, with questions and admiration pouring from the crowds of thousands that gathered to greet the men. Free use of the port's facilities was provided by the Harbour Board. A service of Thanksgiving was held at Christchurch Cathedral, and a celebratory banquet was held by the Philosophical Institute of Canterbury. Bishops, mayors, dignitaries, and huge crowds of cheering people showed their support and praise for Shackleton and the expedition. Shackleton gave a public lecture on the 7th of April 1909 to a crammed audience of over 2,000. He donated the proceeds of the lecture to the children's ward of Christchurch Hospital and to the Christchurch Technical Institute to build a girls' training hostel to accommodate and train young women. The pattern repeated during the next leg of the triumphant journey home. From the end of April, Shackleton swept through Australia on a roar of applause, as Hugh Robert Mill wrote in his 1923 biography. Shackleton gave lectures at Sydney, Melbourne, Adelaide, and Perth, and exercised the reckless generosity of his nature by supporting local hospitals with his collected lecture fees. It was possibly Shackleton's known generosity towards hospitals, as well as his Irish birth, that led Lady Dudley, wife of the Governor-General of Australia, to suggest a lecture in aid of her nurses scheme in Ireland. And that's her in the middle there. Shackleton's return to London on the 14th of June 1909 was a display of pride, showmanship, and fame, when huge crowds gathered to witness his arrival at Charing Cross Station. A grand welcoming reception was held in the Royal Albert Hall on the 28th of June, and on the 12th of July, Ernest and Emily Shackleton attended King Edward VII and Queen Alexandra at Buckingham Palace by personal invitation. Shackleton had been invested into the Royal Victorian Order as a member on the 4th of August 1907, before Nimrod left England. The Royal Victorian Order is a dynastic order of knighthood founded by Queen Victoria in 1896. As of the 10th of July 1909, the King, then Edward VII, promoted Shackleton to commander. Despite his insignia, his neck insignia is there on the left. Despite their earlier reluctance to support him, the Royal Geographical Society feted Shackleton and awarded him a medal in the same way that they had honoured Scott in 1904 after the Discovery Expedition. You can see that medal on the right. He was celebrated by the learned societies, clubs, and high society figures. In the King's birthday honour list of November 1909, Shackleton was granted the honour of knighthood. He was received as a public hero and was well rewarded upon his return to the imperial capital from the Antarctic wilderness. In December 1909, Shackleton returned to the city of Dublin in his native island of Ireland. He was to give a lecture on his Nimrod Antarctic adventures on the 14th of December. On his way across Australia following the return of the expedition, Shackleton had met Rachel, Countess of Dudley, wife of the then Governor-General of Australia from 1908 to 1911. Lady Dudley suggested that he give a lecture in Dublin on behalf of a nursing fund she had initiated. Shackleton, who had so often donated the proceeds of his lectures to local hospitals and philanthropic and charitable enterprises, agreed to Lady Dudley's idea. Shackleton was, at many times of his life, powerless to the suggestions of women, so this may have assisted Lady Dudley's persuasion. Part of her charm may have been that Lady Dudley was known and acknowledged by, at least the Irish Times, as undeniably one of the greatest beauties of today. Lady Dudley was the first wife of William Humble Ward, 2nd Earl of Dudley, who was Lord Lieutenant of Ireland from August 1902 to December 1905. I use this particular portrait of Lord Dudley because he is wearing the robes and regalia of the Grand Master of the Order of St. Patrick. The most illustrious Order of St. Patrick was founded in 1783 and is currently considered to be dormant. As Lord Lieutenant of Ireland, Lord Dudley was ex officio Grand Master of the Order. The regalia of the Grand Master of the Order, commonly and inaccurately known as the Irish Crown Jewels, were discovered to be missing from their safe in Dublin Castle on the 6th of July, 1907, around the time Shackleton was preparing to depart for Antarctica. Although the mystery of the stolen, heavily jeweled regalia has never been solved, many were suspected of being involved in their theft. Suspicions immediately fell on Sir Arthur Vickers, Ulster King of Arms, as the officer responsible for the items. Though never charged, many suspected Frank Shackleton, younger brother of Ernest, and Vickers' second in command, of complicity in the theft. To return to the Dudleys, however, despite the erosion of the Irish viceregal authority across the 19th century, the Dudleys were, as Adam Pohl has written, a great social success. Lady Dudley, in particular, arrived in Dublin with a reputation for hosting successful festivities. The couple entertained lavishly at Dublin Castle. They travelled widely around Ireland and hosted 2 royal visits during Lord Dudley's Lord Lieutenancy. The couple had a holiday home in Connemara in the west of Ireland and summered in Rockingham near Boyle, County Roscommon in 1903. On their journeys across the country, and during their time particularly in the west, they saw the destitution of the population. On Monday, the 20th of October 1902, the Lord Lieutenant and the Countess of Dudley went for a short tour on motor cars in the west of Ireland. Throughout the journey, they made frequent stops at the most miserable looking at the cabins, and leaving the cars, entered into conversation with the peasants. That line is taken from an Irish Times report of the day. Lady Dudley showed a keen interest and spoke to women there in a most kindly manner, making particular inquiries as to the condition of life and the means of livelihood. In his assessment of Lady Dudley, Christopher Kinnean suggested that though she had a reserved and absent manner, she took an unusually prominent public role. Lady Dudley's public visits and patronage clearly demonstrate her interests in provision of assistance and care for the marginalized in society, such as demobilized and injured soldiers and sailors, children, the sick and infirm, and the rural isolated poor. Lady Dudley was perturbed by the lack of medical services in the West and the high levels of social inequity, leading her to write a series of letters that appeared in Irish newspapers in 1902 to 1903. These letters highlighted the lack of proper care for the poor in their homes in the West and appealed for subscriptions to a fund to be expended in the establishment and assisting to maintain nurses in the poorest of the country districts of Ireland. The money collected was to start the Dudley scheme for the establishment of district nurses in the poorest part of Ireland. Within a very short time, the money was flowing in. Donations ranged from £250 of H. Smiley, Esquire, to the modest £1 of Mrs. Lindsay and Annie S. Eustace. Annual subscriptions ranged from the 180-strong support of the Institute of Jubilee Nurses in London to the £1 of Miss M. F. Gibson and that of £1 from Miss Keyes. For her work in initiating the scheme, the Countess of Dudley was appointed a Lady of Grace of the Order of the Hospital of St. John of Jerusalem in England on the 4th of August 1904. It's an order of chivalry constituted in 1888. And this, the badge you see here, was the Lady of Grace badge that was awarded to Florence Nightingale only a few months before Lady Dudley. Lady Dudley was later appointed a Commander of the Order of the British Empire and awarded the Royal Red Cross Second Class for her activities during the First World War. The Order of the British Empire is the Order of Chivalry, which you may be more familiar. That was founded in 1917, and the Royal Red Cross is a military decoration created in 1883. Joseph Robbins highlighted the attraction of the scheme for the moneyed classes of Dublin and across Ireland thus. The linkage with the viceregal court ensured that the nursing associations were perceived as fashionable charities. Because of their loyalist connections, both schemes, that being the Queen Victoria's Jubilee Institute for Nurses and the Lady Dudley scheme, attracted the support of the former ascendancy classes, in particular the old country families, who organised garden parties and other charitable activities to fund the local associations. Though Lady Dudley had, by the time she met Shackleton in Australia in 1909, been away from Ireland for some time, she asked Shackleton to give a lecture to benefit the scheme and to show that, though she had left Ireland, her heart was still with them. Her activities in Ireland and her continued concern for Irish affairs are perhaps part of the reason for her and her husband's popularity in Ireland. In the winter of 1902, Lady Dudley suffered a serious illness. In December, the Irish Times wrote that she's already won her way into the affections of its people, Ireland's people. In all company, the paper reported she's been equally natural and equally charming. Despite such compliments from the press of the day, some would consider a reference to Lady Dudley in James Joyce's Ulysses as immortalizing her. William Humble, Earl of Dudley, and Lady Dudley, accompanied by Lieutenant Heseltine, drove out after the luncheon from the Viceregal Lodge. The process of the Viceregal cavalcade is then recounted following its passage out of the lower gate of the Phoenix Park. Over against the Dame Gate, Tom Rochford and Nosey Flynn watched the approach of the cavalcade. Tom Rochford, seeing the eyes of Lady Dudley on him, took his thumbs quickly out of his pockets of his claret waistcoat and doffed his cap to her. Perhaps it's appropriate that the destination of the Lord Lieutenant and Lady Dudley was, in this Ulysses scene, Mercer's Hospital, to inaugurate the Myra's Bazaar to raise funds for the institution. Sir Ernest Shackleton's lecture in Dublin on the 14th of December 1909 was the big event of his visit to Ireland. It was advertised daily in the Irish Times thus. I hope you can read that. For Shackleton, there was another Dublin Society appointment earlier in the day. He was the honoured guest of a luncheon hosted by the Corinthian Club in the Aberdeen room of the Gresham Hotel on Sackville Street, renamed O'Connell Street in 1924. The Corinthian Club was a gentleman's club founded by Sir Charles Alexander Cameron. He was a chemist, medical officer, and writer. Cameron was president of the Royal College of Surgeons in Ireland, 1885 to 86, and was remembered for his contribution to hygiene and public health. He was a fan of drama and the arts, and his creation and presidency of the Corinthian Club illustrated his tastes and enjoyments. In his book, Reminiscences, Cameron wrote, on the 18th of October, 1897, I invited a few friends to my house to discuss a proposal to establish a club in Dublin on the lines of the Savage Club in London. The club soon established its luncheon and dinner schedule. Cameron himself revelled at dinner parties. His last published article expressed the delightful idea that the excellent habit of dining out was the trick to a long and happy life. At the club's dinners, the members often paid honour to distinguished guests from a variety of spheres of public life. It was, however, as Cameron wrote, chiefly those who distinguished themselves in music and the drama who had been entertained by the club. The Corinthian Club luncheon at the Gresham Hotel was certainly noteworthy, and the Irish Times reported on the hosting of the famous explorer by the fashionable club. The occasion is one of very considerable interest, and a very large party of the members of the club and their guests, including several ladies, attended to do honour to the celebrated Antarctic explorer. Sir Charles Cameron, as president of the club and the presiding chair of proceedings, proposed a toast to Sir Ernest Shackleton. He said that, although the club had entertained many prominent guests in the past, in the matter of interesting personality, none of them had exceeded, in that respect, the gentlemen who they were there that day to honour. Cameron highlighted Shackleton's place in the Royal Navy, the most popular of the public services, and the club's pride in his achievements in the Antarctic. There had been Irish men who had distinguished themselves in the realm of the Arctic, but they could then, Cameron announced, claim an Irishman as the greatest of Antarctic discoverers. This was met with a round of applause from the floor. Acknowledging his failure to actually reach the South Pole, Cameron said that Shackleton had shown others the way there and the means by which it might be reached, and that he was, in effect, the virtual discoverer of the South Pole. Again, this was met with applause. The Norwegian team under Roald Amundsen stopped on the 8th of December 1911 as they reached the farthest south latitude achieved by the four-men team of Shackleton's from the Nimrod expedition. Amundsen later wrote, "We were further south than any human being had been. No other moment of the whole trip affected me like this." They raised the Norwegian flag and paused to consider their own achievements before they continued on to the pole. Amundsen again wrote, "We did not pass that spot without according our highest tribute of admiration to the man who, together with his gallant companions, had planted his country's flag so infinitely nearer to the goal than any of his precursors. Sir Ernest Shackleton's name will always be written in the annals of Antarctic exploration in letters of fire. Pluck and grit can do wonders, and I know of no better example of this than what that man has accomplished." Anyone who has visited the Fram Museum in Oslo will be familiar with this group of statues commemorating the 5 Norwegian men who went on to reach the South Pole on the 14th of December, 1911. In describing the British Antarctic expedition 1907-1909, as reported in the newspaper, Shackleton said that the expedition upon which he had been to the southern continent was one conducted entirely under British auspices, in that it comprised 2 Irishmen, 5 Scottishmen, 2 Welshmen, and the rest were Englishmen. In the circumstances, it seems that he meant that the expedition was British, in that it included men from across the United Kingdom, Great Britain, and Ireland, and strove to achieve its goals for the empire of which all of the crew members were a part. It was an inclusive expedition led by an Irishman who believed in the aspirations as represented by the flag of the Union, under which the expedition sailed. Indeed, it was the Union flag given to Shackleton by Queen Alexandra that he had thrust into the ice at his farthest southern point. Despite Shackleton's clarity concerning his birthplace, the Freeman's Journal found it necessary to print the following in November 1909. "Lieutenant Shackleton's feat is a tangible asset of Ireland. Elsewhere he's been styled a British explorer. We here in the old country know that he's a noble son of a noble Irish family, notable, who have loved and served Ireland at many notable ways. The Shackletons are honoured in Ireland, and we rejoice in the additional renown the young lieutenant has shed upon their name." Shackleton said that it was a source of great pleasure for him to come to Dublin in 1909, and that he felt quite at home there, as he should. Shackleton was born at Kilkee House in County Kildare, but the family moved to 35 Marlborough Road, Dublin, in 1880, when Ernest was 6 years old. You see both of these properties here on the left and right. The Shackletons lived in Dublin for 4 years, as Henry Shackleton, Ernest's father, studied and qualified in medicine in Trinity College, Dublin. 3 Shackleton sisters were born in Dublin: Clara, Helen, and Kathleen. Shackleton's life in Ireland ended when the family crossed the Irish Sea from the North Wall in Dublin in December 1884, aboard the new London and North Western Railway Company paddle steamer Banshee service to Holyhead. The guests at the luncheon in the Gresham were treated to a very enjoyable programme of music from over a dozen musicians. Mr. Henry Hunt, the club's honorary secretary, was praised by Cameron for having devoted much of his time in securing the highest class music at the club dinners. Club's dinners were seemingly a springboard for many musical careers, for as Cameron wrote, "Several young ladies, amateur vocalists, have, so to speak, made their debut at the club's entertainments and have become professionals." The club's musical director, Dr. Thomas Richard Gonsalves Jose, officiated at the piano alongside club member Thomas Henry Weaving. Jose, or Jose, was an organist, choral conductor, and composer who taught for many years at the Royal Irish Academy of Music in Dublin. Weaving was organist at the Abbey Presbyterian Church, known better as Finlayter's Church, and Christ Church in Dunleary. He was the penultimate organist at the Chapel Royal in Dublin Castle, 1917 to 1920, before securing the post of organist at Christ Church Cathedral, Dublin, from 1920 to 1950. I was delighted recently to see the names of Jose and Weaving come up whilst reading the draft of my friend David O'Shea's book, The Choral Foundation of the Chapel Royal, Dublin Castle, which is now available. I just really loved how pleasing that was to see the coincidence in our research. On his arrival at the buildings of the National University on Earlsfort Terrace, Dublin, now the National Concert Hall, a guard of honour was provided for Sir Ernest Shackleton, comprising the Dublin Squadron, the Legion of Frontiersmen, and a party of coastguards from Kingston Coastguard Station. His Excellency John Campbell Hamilton Gordon, First Marquess of Aberdeen and Timir, Lord Lieutenant of Ireland, occupied the chair and opened proceedings. The Lord Lieutenant said that the large crowds were brought together by the exceptional interest of the lecture and to welcome a distinguished explorer, an Irishman. At this point, there was applause, who had come to the Irish capital. After some relevant but unsuccessful attempts at humour, referring to the rival claimants of the North Pole, that's Peary and Cook, and praise for Lady Dudley and the most beneficial work of the nursing scheme, the Lord Lieutenant announced, "I have the great pleasure in introducing Sir Ernest Shackleton." Shackleton was received with hearty applause by the audience of the Soul-led venue. As Michael Smith has noted, Shackleton knew how to engage with people, either in close proximity or in large numbers at vast meeting halls. He had a charm, an easygoing conviviality, and as he gave his lectures without notes, which is harder than it looks, his manner was very appealing. Sir Ernest took his audience through the highs and lows, the hardships, and the camaraderie of the expedition's work. With his light-hearted jests and cheer, he kept his listeners attentive and engaged. Throughout his lecture, Shackleton had a selection of photographs from the expedition and maps of the areas visited, as was advertised in the newspapers. After telling the story of the expedition's exploits, the rest of the lecture was devoted to the exhibition of a number of slides, illustrating various incidents of note which occurred throughout the voyage. These included the movements and activities of the men of the expedition and those of the wildlife around them, the penguins, the birds, the seals, etc. And this provided a very great deal of amusement to the audience. And I hope it was something along these lines, pictures like these nice Adelie penguins nesting. At the end of a speech at the luncheon earlier on in the day, Shackleton praised the loyalty of his expedition colleagues. He again returned to speak of his men at the conclusion of his lecture. He praised the work of the scientific team of the expedition, who were then busy producing memoirs and reports of their findings in the Antarctic regions. All of the men of the expedition had worked very hard, he said. As the Irish Times reported, Shackleton finished his lecture thus: "They, the crew of the expedition, were not standing so much in the limelight as he was, but he realized, and so would everybody else, that but for the splendid cooperation of those who helped him, very little would have been accomplished." Shackleton had similarly displayed such gratitude in his speech in June to the Royal Society Club in London. The expedition, he said, would never have been such a success if it had not been for their denial of self and their single-hearted devotion to the object in view. Dermot Robert Wyndham Burke, 7th Earl of Mayo, in proposing a vote of thanks to Shackleton, said that they all realized that the great hardships through which he and his companions had gone on their voyage in the South Pole and the benefits which the journey had conferred upon human knowledge and science. General the Right Honourable Sir Neville Littleton, who had also attended the Corinthian Club luncheon, seconded the vote of thanks, and it was carried by acclamation. Sir Ernest Shackleton was an entertaining all-round success in the eyes of Dublin high society. Attendees at the National University that evening had been in the presence of the Lord Lieutenant and many aristocratic figures. Fashionable society had come out to see the famous hero, the Irish poster boy of polar exploration. Freeman's Journal wrote, "Sir Ernest was quite an ideal lecturer. Manly, frank, and honest, he recounted his experience in a style quite his own, and a mere cold, literal transcription of his words would completely fail to convey even the rough idea of the charm with which he threw into his brief sketch of his historic tour. As well as paying a deserved tribute to a distinguished and intrepid Irishman, in publicising the event, the Irish Times also said that in attending Sir Ernest's lecture, the public will help maternally in succouring many poor peasants in pain and suffering. The paper said that they hoped the lecture would be beneficial to Lady Dudley's nursing scheme, for it would be a grievous loss if one of the nurses had to be withdrawn from a district whose inhabitants had learned to rely on her skill and counsel. Shackleton's Dublin lecture raised £315, 12 shillings and sixpence for the Lady Dudley scheme. Despite this being a great sum of money, the scheme was always short of funds. In 1910, the salaries of this scheme's nurses amounted to £1,806, 6 shillings, 11 pence, the largest expense of the total expenditure of just under £4,000. The scheme reached an optimum level of 21 nurses, but expanded no further due to constant financial constraints. The scheme's nurses quickly overcame a distrust of medical personnel in the rural population and had a profound effect in rural home care and cleanliness. They impressed a party of visiting members of Parliament in 1906 when they saw the value of the work undertaken by devoted women. As Katrina Clear has noted, the training, professions, and employment of the scheme gave many opportunities to women for very hard but fulfilling work with few holidays. The nurses were all regularly overworked, and their diligence was often to their own detriment. They often willingly risked life and limb in travelling and attending to those in their care. As Joseph Robbins noted, in many areas the carefully chosen district nurse became a familiar and highly respected personality, pedaling around on her high bicycle. Problems that faced the scheme in providing the medical assistance to parts of the west of Ireland included travelling to the isolated rural areas and the poverty of the patients encountered. A nurse attending a maternity case in 1910 recalled, "The house is an old stable. There is no bed in the house, just a table, one chair, and one stool. They are very poor." The patient was lying in a corner in a frightful condition. The Irish Times reported there was a consistent need for funds to continue and to extend the scheme's reach to other equally poor and necessitous districts. As well as direct care provision, Sheila Armstrong has written that the Lady Dudley nurses, along with the Jubilee nurses, were involved in the development of the Child Welfare and School Health Service between 1907 and 1915. Shackleton, in a small way, assisted the work of the nurses to provide domiciliary medical care and to improve public health and sanitation to the poorest parts of Ireland. Shackleton was happy to donate to causes that furthered the education of women, brought healthcare provision, and assisted the marginal in society. Mills said of his companion that he overflowed with kindness and could never bear to see anyone unhappy or in want without offering help. Shackleton's 1909 lecture is commemorated in the National Concert Hall in the form of a small plaque. It was unveiled on the 6th of February 2012 during an evening of lectures, poetry, theatre and song at the NCH to remember the Irish polar explorers. The plaque is quite shiny, notoriously, and difficult to photograph, but Sarah did a very good job on this photograph during a day at work at the concert hall. So essentially what you've just heard is an expanded and illustrated version of a paper that I wrote that was included in the James Caird Society Journal in 2019. So if you'd like to look at this again or to look at maybe my source list, please feel free to have a look at the Society's website and the journal, which is available there in their publication section. The Society is based in Dulwich College, where Shackleton went to school as a young boy, and essentially promotes the legacy of Shackleton and tells the stories of polar exploration, both north and south So if you're interested in that kind of thing, have a look at what they do, maybe join, or just read and see their great resources available in their journals. If you want to know what I kind of do, you can follow the Facebook page if you wish. They're on the left. I post most days of the week, nice on this day kind of things, and news about polar exploration. The Twitter there on the right too. Most importantly, citing my image sources, which is very important too. So I'll leave that one there. Thanks very much for coming. Thanks for listening. I hope you took something from it. Cheers.